traditional BPO that continues to do well at providing the labor solution. And then as the BPOs that are adopting technology and not seeing it as a threat to their business, but as a natural part of the progression of their business. And that's really where there's two categories of BPOs sort of coming out.
Good morning, everybody. This is Get in the Hole podcast with Nick Mulholland. I'm your host, Nick Mulholland. Welcome. We have a very interesting guest, as we always do. Today is Andy Griffiths from Outsourced Consultancy. Andrew, we're really glad you're here.
Thanks for having me. And we can't do the Andy Griffith thing because the older viewers will get confused as to whether it's actually the Andy Griffith or Andy Griffiths.
I mean, I'm able to whistle that song really well, just to be clear.
Maybe we'll close on that.
Maybe we can close on that. That's true. So as we always do, we start with what are we drinking today, which for those of you that love alcohol, today is not the day, being that we're recording at 9 a.m. So unless we were on the golf course, it's really not looked upon greatly to be drinking at 9 a.m. So, Andrew, what do you got for us today?
So I have a shot freshly pulled espresso from my local roasters, Huckleberry Roasters. So I got a nice Ethiopian, single origin, coffee snob extraordinaire here. So
I was going to say, you mentioned you're a big coffee person.
Yeah. It's one of my few remaining vices in life. So I indulge.
There you go.
Heavily in caffeine.
There you go. I'm on the exact opposite. I don't really drink caffeine too much, and I'm drinking a very delicious protein shake that my golf trainer now has me on, and try to put down more protein. It's a journey.
So whey protein, vegetable based. What do we like?
It was recommended by him. It's called Ascent. I got the peanut butter chocolate.
Ascent. Good choice.
It's pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty good. So anyway, would recommend if you're trying to load up on protein. As we've kind of gotten to know each other, I felt that you have a very interesting background in what we do. So why don't you talk a little bit about your history and then a little bit more about what you do at Outsourced Consultants, which is a partnership that we have.
So this is where I get to use the beard as a visual prop. So people say, how long have you been in the contact center space? I'm like, the color of the beard. So a couple of decades.
Makes sense.
How long have you been in the BPO space? Well, the length of the beard. So about 3 to 4 years.
There you go. Love that.
So the visual prop works out for me.
That's funny.
I've done everything from a supplier side, started out in technology, working as sales and sales overlay for SaaS companies, spent time selling direct, spent a lot of time selling through the indirect channel, which I know you're familiar with. So most of my career has been on the technology side. It was 4 or so years ago that kind of hit the point where everybody's solutions started to feel very similar. Like technology, it was good. Technology got to the point where there wasn't one that was way out in front and the others were newcomers. It was sort of at the point where there was a lot of sameness, and I was striving.
But Gartner's Magic Quadrant says some are really farther along than others. Why is that?
I don't work at Gartner. I couldn't possibly tell you that answer. You can speculate all you like.
Anyway, didn't mean to interrupt you, but I thought I'd throw that in there as a fun little knowledge tip for everybody that looks at Gartner's.
Yeah, and it depends on application, right? But I would say at that point in time, for 95% of customers, they couldn't have made a bad choice. They could make a slightly better choice based on their environment, but there was so many good choices. And I got to the point where I'm like, there has to be something more that we can bring to the table to help, right? Because my thought is our role is to bring solutions. And if we truly mean that, it's not selling a product, it's solving a problem. Right? A solution inherently needs a problem to attach itself to and resolve.
I agree. Absolutely.
I was working at the time for TSD, a distributor, with a great portfolio of sort of mainstream products. And there was this, in my opinion, need for specific point solutions to solve specific problems that played nice in the ecosystem that clients already had. So that was kind of in my head of, okay, maybe this next iteration needs to have something from that genre. And then I went totally off the rails and found outsourcing and went, wait a minute, that fits with the category of what I'm looking for. The idea of bringing labor and technology together, and the I don't know of problems in the contact center that you can't solve when you've got a toolbox of technology and a toolbox of labor.
Mhm.
So that's how I ended up working at Outsourced Consultants.
And you guys, again, we have a partnership that we utilize you depending on the project for, your access and relationships with, is it over 200 BPOs, which is
Mhm.
outsourced call centers all over the world?
All over the world. Yeah, about 1,000 locations to pick from across those couple of hundred providers.
Yeah. So finding, what the hourly rate for South Africa versus the Philippines, that's your company specialty, correct?
Yeah, and we can even get down with a portfolio of the size we have into specific experience in the vertical, things like the culture of the BPO and the culture of the client need to be compatible. So yeah, lots of ability to sort by nuance and find the perfect fit.
Yeah. So in the projects and the agents, the independent sales folks that you support, like us, and other times that you're working with clients directly, what are some of the things that you recommend people are looking at when they're evaluating BPO? You mentioned the cultural thing. I totally agree with that. And I think that that's a fantastic one, obviously price, but what are some of the things you're seeing that differentiates one BPO versus another? And
There are lots of factors, right? If you sit through a typical BPO presentation, culture comes up because one of the biggest challenges, anybody who's been around the contact center space knows this, is retention. Retention of agents is tough. It's been tough. The only time it wasn't tough was during COVID lockdown. And for a minute, we forgot about it. And then we were promptly reminded right after COVID. So we're back in that world again. So there's a lot of focus around why the BPO's culture is different, and hence why people stay longer. Because I think it's no secret that a longer tenured agent on average will perform better from a CSAT perspective. So I think there's a lot of talk around that. Honestly, where I see the biggest difference now, and there's a traditional BPO that continues to do well at providing the labor solution. And then as the BPOs that are adopting technology and not seeing it as a threat to their business, but as a natural part of the progression of their business. And that's really where there's two categories of BPOs sort of coming out. And I'm not advocating that one's better than the other. If the client is very tech savvy, works with you guys, has everything buttoned up and wants to extend that, just has no desire to recruit and retain the agents or wants a BPO to do that, then that traditional BPO is a perfect fit. But we're starting to see the lines blurring and the client bringing some technology, the BPO deploying other technology, especially in the realm of agent assist and that type of thing. So that's really where I'm seeing the biggest difference. And like every difference, there's not a this is good and this is bad, therefore you should seek the first one. It's like understand where you're at and what your journey as a client is going to be and what your preferences are, and find a partner that fits and complements what you want to do. Essentially, you're outsourcing because there's a task you don't want to do. And from the labor side, that's a recruitment and retention task.
For our viewers out there that they've never dealt with trying to outsource to a BPO, maybe they're not familiar with the whole gig work thing. I personally love using like a Fiverr or a freelancer for certain things. We have outsourced call center, a couple folks. Talk to them about what's the entry point from can I get one caller for 20 hours a week? Or do I have to automatically have 10? Like, talk us through that a little bit.
It depends. I'll give you two answers. The easiest answer for me to give you is what our entry point is and why that is. There is absolutely, as you point out, with a couple of folks, a category below that. So we specialize in high quality results at cost effective prices. We do that by picking what we would term mid-market BPO providers. So they're large enough to be good at what they do, but they're also small enough that if you place 25, 50, 100 seats, you're a notable customer for them. The giant BPOs that you would find, ironically enough, in the Gartner Magic Quadrant wouldn't notice you at 25 seats. And
Of course.
your experience may be reflective of that potentially.
Right.
So finding a BPO that's sized appropriately with the amount of business you have to place for them is important. Our 10-seat entry point is 10 seats is about where you start to get a dedicated supervisor. And that is a pivotal point in terms of the likely quality outcome. When you've got a supervisor that moves between several groups of, 2 or 3 agents here,
Mhm.
there's a lower likelihood that that will be a fantastic outcome. And not to say it won't be, it's just a lower likelihood.
It's
So,
like,
as an organization, we want to make sure that our brand is associated with the best possible outcome. So, we've chosen to say 10 seats, which is
Mhm.
basically a full team with a supervisor dedicated. That's our starting point. Absolutely, there are companies you can go to for smaller, but it fits nicely when you look at it from a client side. We've had many conversations over the years with startup companies saying, we want no part of this CX thing. We want to do whatever it is we do. We're really good and passionate about that. We don't want to deal with the customer experience. Can you just take it from the get-go? And the answer usually is not really, because you don't yet know what your customers are going to ask you. And if you're early stage in developing a product, that cycle of feedback needs to be as short as possible.
Right.
So, sorry, Mr. Founder, you've got to answer the phone for a bit,
Right.
right? It's
Well,
just the way it's
you got to engage some way, right? And I mean,
right.
with the way I'm actually kind of interested in what you think of, the shift between millennials and how they're engaging companies and how companies need to support users like them, clients like them, versus old school people that I kind of find myself that I want to talk with a human that helps me fix the problem.
Personally, slightly twitch when people feel the need to put an age category on how somebody wants to react or interact.
Right.
Maybe the stereotypes are warranted, but generally speaking, I think that the thing you have to be mindful of is different people have different preferences. Their preferences will change according to the contact type that it is, and maybe the time of day and maybe the circumstance. There's so many different factors. The thought that I need to say millennials do X and Gen whatever's do this, I'm sure it's interesting research somewhere for somebody, but for us practitioners in the real world, you've got to be able to meet your customers where they're at, and you've got to assume they're going to be at different places. So having a variety and be able to pivot between those different modalities seamlessly and without a reset, that's critical.
In the projects that you guys support, you're doing that, right? So companies are coming to you saying, we need to improve our customer journey. I mean, customer journey, I feel like that's only been a talk point for the last, that's just a buzz thing for the last 3 years, but it now is tremendously important on, because the brand loyalty stuff is kind of deteriorating if there is not that good client journey. Would you agree?
We're in a super interesting point, I would say, in the whole journey. And I'm hypercritical of us as an industry because I take the perspective of what is my experience as a consumer? I know what's possible. I know technically what's possible. And right now, the technical possibilities are higher than have ever been. The fact that you could take an agent and you could basically empower them with all of this technology and have stuff looked up and presented to them, have access across these systems, historical data, all of this is easily technically possible. Therefore, as a CX aware consumer, I would expect stuff to be fantastic.
And
And
sometimes
it's not. I think what you're saying is it's worse than it used to be. So we're going to hit an inflection point. And I'm continually going to end customers and saying, look, within your sector, the average standard is from kind to mediocre, probably worse. Do you want to be the one to fix that? Because if you make the decision that you want to differentiate your brand based on experience, so there are examples, right? There's companies out there that have done this and have a name for themselves and have brand loyalty as a result. It's really not that hard to do that now, and you'll get a jump in revenue. Isn't that the objective for most businesses? So I think from the market trends that we're seeing, we're coming out the back end of cost cutting. And we're now starting to realize, well, sure, we'd like to spend less, but we also need to drive revenue. And when a business's experience is not so much based on human face-to-face interaction as it used to be, and now is based on lots of virtual things. The technology plays a part, and the contact center plays a part more so than it ever has done. And I think I've described this in prior conversations as we're on the start or the cusp of the golden age of CX, meaning that we just need those innovators to, within each industry, show what can be done. And then the natural course of business takes over. And oh my goodness, we've just lost market share to XYZ company. What are they doing? And then they get emulated, and then the general tide raises. Hopefully that first company then says, oh, what else can we do? So I'm trying to start a CX race so that we as consumers have a more positive experience and the industry as a whole is raised. Also, the fascinating thing that that does is all of the low-level, repetitive, relatively menial work starts to shift off down into the technology realm, and the people employed within the CX space, the agents, start to do more interesting work. And we get away from one of the other issues that I believe we have as an industry, which is this is not an attractive profession in the US. It is in other places in the world. But if you're in the US and you say, hey, I work in a contact center, probably the next question is, when are you leaving?
No, and actually there's been a very interesting shift. I agree with watching the technology vendors where they're promoting their selling points to customers are, we're going to use AI and we're going to learn from how your customers are contacting you today, how your agents are engaging. And when that AI is learning and learning and learning, being able to remediate more and more and more of the problems faster without engaging an agent, that's where there can be a cost savings. That's where you're getting happier customers. But what I've found, as you were kind of mentioning, it's to each individual, we'll call it tech leader within these organizations. It can be amazing sometimes where we know that the tech is available, just like you said, but their current stack is so piecemeal that the idea that they're going to start transitioning things to what would be a much better solution for them and their client, it's just too much. It's like they're unwilling to make that change because it's not completely broken, if that makes sense.
It's tough, right? We're in an awkward part of evolution of AI and CX. So much promise. And yet, how do you get from where you're at today and the realities of the Frankenstack or whatever you want to call it into this sort of mythical ideal where humans and bots are working in harmony and the CX is wonderful? And I don't think, just for the record, that the number of human agents is going to decrease, but the type of work they're going to do and the experience they deliver is going to be radically different. So you'll have happier customers, you'll have happier employees. The robots are doing the stuff we don't want to do, and it's great, right? But that is still science fiction for everybody I've talked to. Nobody's got that yet. The question is, it's a journey. The term is used for a reason. It's not a I'm here and now I'm here and it was Tuesday to Wednesday. That journey, the clock only starts when you start moving. So what we're seeing is people like the ideal. They buy into it. They can see it. They've touched enough AI that they believe it's possible. But how do they start? And how do they not start in the wrong direction? They have to reset, waste a bunch of time. That's really where I feel the majority of, and there's always exceptions, right? But the majority of the market is in that. I want to, I'm interested, I like the potential. What do I do? How do I do it?
Well, and that's where I think that our organizations collectively, we provide a lot of value because the vendors are coming to us, various vendors are coming to us to be included in our portfolios, which then allows us to kind of pick and choose the best of the best, who's doing what. And that's where we're able to engage experts like yourself or other resources to help navigate that. Because it's tough being a decision maker out there, especially with I feel like C-level business owners. They'll see buzzwords, they'll read an article, CFO is included in that, and now it's we got to start using AI to do what? What's the I don't know. It's kind of like cybersecurity. Well, I don't want to pay all this money, but we need to be protected. Well, you can't kind of do both. So I have a feeling me and you could keep talking about this forever, but I did want to bring up, because I thought it's one of the more interesting business discussions that you have with clients, that we have with clients, which is your three-phase framework for CX improvement within a stat budget. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So this originally came out of post-pandemic when the cloud migration budgets before were free-flowing. They kind of slowed down / stopped. So working with our partners in the technology realm was like, what's getting in your way? Like the idea of being a good partner is to figure out how I can help you be successful in helping the clients that you have. What's getting in your way? Well, budgets. So we figured out how we could structure a process so that even within a static budget, you could create the funds to go buy the technology. So that was its initial purpose. What's happened since is we've talked with many clients that have said, I don't have a problem with budget. We're doing fine financially. The problem that I'm having is with the use case that goes into the budget justification. AI, especially Gen AI, it does what you need it to do. And what you need it to do is going to be different than the other company down the road. At least hopefully, right? You should be doing something unique. So when you do something unique, figuring out, okay, how long is it going to take to deploy this when you've got that data set cleanliness issue? And once it's deployed, how's it going to affect my employees, my clients, my partners? What actually happens? And if you follow almost any AI deployment story, it wasn't we hypothesized this and then it came out exactly as we expected. It's usually we thought it was going to do this. It didn't. It was terrible at that. I mean, just look at the recent stuff. Can't even tell you how many R's are in strawberry, right? If you've seen those on social media. So there's some things it's really bad at, but then there's other things it's really good at. But that's different in each environment and each company. So they were finding out that there isn't the ability to fit with that traditional business model of tell me the return, by what date, and what modality, and give me a case study. You really can't do that. So even those companies that had money, had a C-suite that had seen those articles you talked about, said, we need this. They still couldn't get stuff through. So they were coming to us and saying, okay, this three-phase framework gets me a budget in some other way. How's that work? And it's really simple. We look at labor, and with all of the capabilities we have across the globe, almost always we can find a way to improve the quality of the CX and reduce the spend. Labor is a massive percentage of a company spend. I don't have to come back with a high percentage savings. So this is not a CX impacting in a negative way kind of a savings. This is, I can fix some specific problems that you've got. Classic example would be, hey, I'm 100% US based, having a really hard time with Spanish language skills and retaining people, and it's really expensive. We'll come in, find something near shore, so just south of the US border, much more cost effective, great Spanish speaking, great English speaking, solves a bunch of problems a business has, and creates a budget.
Over cost.
So that budget, then you make a deal with your CFO to say, hey, can I keep it? And when they say no, ask if you can keep half of it. That'll still cover you. So that's usually how that negotiation goes. So you give half of the savings to the CFO, you keep half of it, and you invest it in technology. That removes all of those timeline expectations. So it means when you hit roadblocks with data set cleanliness or readiness, you can work through them. You can basically risk mitigate all of the things that are likely to trip you up in that deployment. And then you can figure out what the best path is. So you sort of get a free sandbox, if you will, and the opportunity to figure it out and come up with the right solution. Yeah. So that's the first two phases. And then where we're encouraging back to the using CX as a differentiator, you know this as well as I do, the potential for cost savings with the technology are significant. I will go back and say, I don't think that's through reduction in headcount. I think that's through improvements in lots of things such as CX. But really the third phase is a deliberate and purposeful redeployment of the savings from the first two phases into pushing you as the CX leader within your space. So maybe in almost every case, that's going to be a high-end agent with lots of technology surrounding them and empowering them to provide a CX at a level that nobody else is doing in your industry. typically we'll see that start. Airlines are the classic, right? They'll give their best service, i.e. the only service potentially, to their high spending customers, and then it kind of degrades from there.
Yeah.
That model makes sense because you've got to put the investment where the revenue is, but there's a trickle down effect, or at least there should be.
Mhm.
So the idea is all through those three phases, you're not increasing the risk the company's exposed to because you're able to do that second phase of technology, Gen AI proof point in a safe environment within the company. And then you continue to invest. So ultimately what you're doing is not spending a dime more, but hugely differentiating the business and driving increased revenues.
Like I said, that's why I was interested. Part of the reason I was interested in having you on is that three-phase model is quite good, and it makes a lot of sense logically. Before we go, I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about your podcast. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we've been going since earlier this year, as myself and a colleague of mine, Tom Luther. Conveniently enough, Tom is completely bald. So he decided I have to put this out there because it's going to sound bad if I don't. He decided on the name, The Bald and the Beard.
Bald and the Beard.
So I'm now branded and stuck looking after this thing for the foreseeable future.
It's a while ago.
But it's funny. We started doing it because we wanted a forum where we could talk about some of the myths in the CX and BPO space. So we pick a myth and we talk about it. We talk about our experiences with it. Tom's run contact centers. I've been on the software side. I've been involved in a lot of business strategy stuff. So we've got different perspectives. We argue a little sometimes, but ultimately come down to whether we think there's validity in that particular myth or not. We just did it because we wanted to be able to share our views. What I've noticed now is when I'm out at conferences, I'll have people tap me on the shoulder and say, "You're the beard." And the first time that happened, it was so strange. Now I just turn around and say, yes, I am. And it starts a conversation. But I was thinking about it, actually, as I was pulling my coffee shot, there's a guy, James Hoffman, he's a British coffee YouTuber. Mm-hmm. And if you really want to geek out on coffee, I'd recommend checking his stuff out. But it's unless you really care about coffee, it's probably a bit much. But I feel like I know that guy because I've watched so much of his content. And that's the sort of underlying benefit of doing this is people get an understanding of who we are, right? Not just what we do. This is not a commercial. We could have been over in 5 minutes for that. It's more about who are we? And I think in business, finding good people to do business with that you align and that where they're going is similar to where you want to go. I think that's one of the things that this social media and video world that we're in allows us to do and select the people that make sense. I'm all for it. Like if people select me because they want to work with me, that's fantastic. That makes them a better fit. It's more enjoyable for everybody. I know you and I have talked off camera about, finding that community that just likes who you are and what you do.
Yep. Well, that's it. I mean, I think I told you I started the podcast based upon our ideal customer profile, which is technology decision makers and organizations that like drinking and golf.
Pretty specific.
When we find those people, typically that we become close friends, and obviously we build trust with them over time. We are definitely running up on time. I know that we had talked. So tell us, as we always try to finish on something golf related, your greatest moment in life involving golf.
It's more of a memory. It's more of a memory than a moment. Okay. There's not. So I hate to disappoint the audience, but I'm not a golfer. But there's a very fond memory of my grandfather. So he 5 kids, was a quantity surveyor in Yorkshire in the UK. So I'm not that you can really tell, there's not much accent left, but I am officially British. So I remember as a kid going to visit him with my parents, and he had this pristine back lawn. Like it wasn't a fancy house, but the back lawn was pristine for one sole purpose, is that he loved to putt. And I don't even know what you call those things. I think they were intended to be inside. They have those little petal leaves around the outside, and you you put into it. This is a long time ago, so maybe that wouldn't exist anymore. And though if you didn't hit it hard enough, it would roll up and then roll back. But if you did hit it hard enough, there was a little pivot, and then it would go in, and then that would be in the hole. So he had those, and he moved them around so that once you figured out the lawn's undulations on how to get it in every time, he'd just move it. And this was endless fun for me as a under 10-year-old kid with a golf ball and a putting iron. So
I was going to say, the amount of love and care and time and effort that you need to have your own maintained, like, manicured green, that's a lot of love. So that's a really cool story. My favorite golf moment, I had a hole-in-one from 162 yards out. So that's mine. Nice and simple. But Andrew, really appreciate you being on. It's fantastic talking with you. Anybody that check out the Ball in the Beard, excuse me.
Ball in the Beard. Yep.
Ball in the Beard. And otherwise, if you want to have a conversation with Andrew, you can contact us here at Tech-Gofer. We appreciate you checking out the podcast today. Like, share with others, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, everybody.